the one and only Richard Louis, news anchor at MSNBC and NBC, an author, creator, filmmaker, humanitarian, and human rights activist. Richard will share his story on selflessness, community, and also building a stronger business. He recently published a marvelous and must-read book on the topic called Enough About Me. And we will be giving away 250 copies of his book, so stay tuned. So Richard, a warm welcome, and it's really great to have you with us. So we're very excited to hear your story, and the floor is all yours.
Robin, it's great to be here. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you that are here with us for the World Trade Centers Association gathering today. It's great to be here for the WTCA General Assembly. During the day, I am a news anchor and journalist and have been working lately, I should say, for the last decade with an organization called NBC News and MSNBC. And before that was CNN International, CNN Domestic, and CNN Headline News. It's great to be here and to, well, it's a little daunting, if you will, Robin, in that this is the finishing of a great 4-day program that the WTCA has put together. And as we look at the important thematics, and I know that Roberto just finished a great message as he sat from MIT and what can be done in business. And I want to talk about something that's a little bit, if you will, on the side, and certainly on the side for me as well as a journalist. And I'll just tell you what has brought me to this very idea of selflessness and the idea of the selfless business. First off, is as I've been reporting on mass killings and shootings for the past 5 to 7 years, it has been heartbreaking for me. What I often will say is that I've become very good at something I don't want to be good at. And I've become very good at covering tragedy for hours. And the ability to talk about people losing their lives, because of what I would say is the epitome of selfishness. Those who think their views are better and stronger and more right, if you will, to the point where they think they can take other people's lives. And this was true when I stood in the streets of Paris. It's true when I stood in the streets of Delhi talking about human trafficking. It was also true when I stood in the streets of Uruguay, in the streets when I stood in Poland and Warsaw, as well as when I stood in the streets in Ghana and the United States, across our country as well, which is where I sit today. And that brought me to the concept that we are living through a selfish pandemic. We are all living through a viral pandemic where we have certainly seen the examples of those individuals who believe that their view on what health might mean, mask or not. And it's great that we now live in a time where we can sit in our homes and not wear a mask. But those who did not do that in the public would affect individuals that are very close to me, my parents, who are quite susceptible to this unfortunate virus. And when we saw that, that was another example of the selfish pandemic. It's not about politics. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about simply thinking of others. And so that is what brought me together to believe that we are living through a selfish pandemic because of that easiness of being violent or being hateful. And it's so simple, unfortunately, and we don't believe that there's a price. And so I think as businesses, as trade centers, as collections of an important entity in our great societies across the country, we need to remember why we were able to continue on over the last year. And that is simply because, if you think about it, April 2020, this same month, 1 year ago, was when the world, half of the world, was asked to stay home. Close to 4 billion people. It has never happened in the history of the world, the number, nor the very percentage. And the reason why we were able to survive through that is because of selflessness. There were businesses that provided food, that there are organizations and utilities that continued to function to give us water and electricity. And because of all of this, all of these selfless organizations that continued to work despite all of the questions and the unknowns, right? All of the healthcare workers in the healthcare industry that moved ahead, the folks that kept on working on the vaccines across the world, all of them were there to take care of us, the 4 billion that were asked to stay home. We could not have survived at home if it weren't for them. And so without the selfless notions that were part of business and that were part of organizations such as all of yours and the associations that and the businesses that your associations represent was so important. And one of the concepts I do want to bring up in this idea of a selfless business is that business was created for that very idea. If we think about it for a moment, when the feudal systems ruled the world and the royal systems ruled the world, the economies were dictated by these feudal leaders. And so businesses led by individuals like yourselves was created so that we could have commerce and we could bring the power of economies lower to people, down to us, so that we could decide on products and prices that were relevant to us. That was the beginning of the idea of business. And we think of that concept of where business began outside of the feudal system. That is what we can be today. That means a rethinking, perhaps, as we have already gone through in the last year, where businesses have realigned to be selfless. Where I work at, which is in one of the 3 networks in the United States at NBC News and MSNBC, we now have 5% of our employees at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. 5%. Yet we continue to be able to function as a television network. And something that was highly physical is now something that is highly disaggregated. And we're able to do that because our organization moved quickly in a way that was able to continue to employ people like me and others so that we can keep our economic health, our families, our paychecks, and continue to move on. And many organizations moved in ways that were quite selfless, in the way that when the feudal system changed so many hundreds of years ago. And when we look at that opportunity, and I'll finish my opening comments with this, is that when we look at business evolution, it often equals public good. And just within the last year, we've seen that. And the idea of how may I help you, which if for a moment is the core of what business asks, B2B or B2C or G to B2C or G to B to C, how may I help you? And for that moment, I think we have the opportunity to think of what does help mean to our customer sets? And that help is, how can I help you be better? And I think we have the opportunity to rethink how we can help each other be better, all of our customers. How can we help you live and exist in a better way? And sometimes it has been misconstrued, misaligned as, how can I sell you something? And at the end of the day, we may end up selling you something, but at the core of what we might ask ourselves, if we were to assign a chief selfless officer in all of our organizations, is to ask that very core question: how can I help you be better? And that, I think, means that business evolution equals public good. And I can dig in more into some of the ideas behind that I discuss in the book. But Robin, that is, I think, the opportunity. It is what we've seen in the last year. And it's not just to focus, of course, on the last year, because certainly business, going back to, the history of many epochs, such as when the Dutch East India Company was chartered in the 1600s, moves forward to today as we now exist in 2021.
Well, thank you, Richard. And first, I find it personally very moving, your story, and admire you for all the choices that you took here. And I really want to go drill back down a little bit to the notion. It's fascinating that you take back the notion of selflessness all the way to the escape of the feudal system. But before we go there, please, any more questions, and questions are coming in, please put them in the Q&A box. We're also going to have a poll up, and Richard, we did a poll also with Roberto just before you came on, and he thought it was the most scientific poll ever done. So question 1 is here, do you practice a notion of selflessness in everyday life? And question 2 for the poll is, do you believe that being more selfless creates more personal happiness? So Richard, let's go back to when you spoke about the origins of business and the escape of the feudal system. How can you transport that notion of selflessness then to the role of business today? We yesterday spoke about purpose-driven leadership and about purpose-driven companies. So how would you put that in a let's say contemporary context? Is there a modern day feudal system that we need to escape, and where selflessness is the solution?
Well, as we look at the great industrial revolutions that have swept the world in our modern millennium, we all have to look at some of the cataclysms that have struck the world that have brought us onto these industrial revolutions. And, all of them have fundamentally transformed the way that we have lived. As we now go through what might be considered 3.5 or 4.0, I argue that we are going through 4.0. 4.0, the cataclysm that we are facing now certainly has been and is the viral pandemic. And if we were to look at the last industrial revolution, which some might say is the digital revolution, and then you can add in everything else that you might want to this, Robin, is that we saw around the world the end of the Cold War. And all of a sudden, the great industries and technologies that were at our behest, at our very front door, sat there wondering what to do, if you will, for a moment. And so it moved from the military complex, all of that great brain power and resource, over to industry. And at that time, industry meant digital. And so that's what we have benefited from within the last 5 decades. If the Cold War did not end, I posit, the question might be, where would all the great brain power and money be? It might be on how to kill each other. Instead, it moved into a completely different industrial opportunity. And today, as we look at the opportunity that the viral pandemic has brought upon our world, is now, I do believe, a selfless revolution. The opportunity now to realign about what we might think of when we're thinking of what our businesses can do. Mm-hmm. And it's no surprise that when we look at the polls, and I know you just did several polls, and Roberto believing that this is the most scientific, and I'll go with him for a moment, but of course I'll wait to see what the results are before I say that I agree with him, is that we are the great opportunity of realizing that the idea of a social impact business is no longer a social impact business. It's not a sector, it's not a group, it's not a separate category, which is when I went to business school, the way we thought of it. And now we are all social impact businesses. And the opportunity to rethink that in the way that we assess how we do things. And I've already mentioned 1 or 2 ideas, but the very marketing function within itself has sometimes been in, out, or out, in. And I do believe now we're definitely looking at out in. What does the market want? What is the true function of marketing, which is to understand the market conditions first. The market conditions, in the very essence of what that question might be, is looking outward first. So if we move away from what does the company do better, or what does the company want to do, as opposed to what does the market want, what does the market demand right now? And it's a definitely a shake to the system, Robin, to go back to your basics, your marketing 101, if you will. And sometimes we do forget that because of the way that our quarter to quarter system functions and demands that envelop that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these are some excellent points, Richard. I definitely don't want to take some time to also go to the book and to your personal journey. So when you decided to become a caretaker of your father, how did this blend with being a full-time news anchor? I mean, did you have to make a choice? And was this a choice between career versus private, meaning caring for an elder?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point in that, as we function as very fervent contributors to our organizations, right? When do we think outside of that? And I think as a news anchor and a journalist, it's been one of those opportunities, as my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 8 years ago, to reassess why I was getting up in the morning and putting my feet on the floor. And why is it that I went to the organization in Midtown New York every day? What I like to say is 8 days a week, because it certainly felt that way. And then make the decision that 8 days a week was not the right number. That indeed it was less. It was 2 or 3 days. And the person that brought me to where I got certainly was my father and my mother. Now, I didn't come to that necessarily in that understanding until I was writing the book over the last year, actually sitting in this very seat, sitting during a pandemic as all of us did together, wherever we're sitting today, and realigning and reassessing what the values that I had and what did they mean. And then I realized, Robin, that the values of what got me to put my feet on the floor when I got out of bed every day were the ones that they lived every day themselves, as people that were not of great wealth or background or anything like that. They came to the United States, my grandparents, so that a person like myself, my grandparents, my grandfather came from southern China, was a poor Chinese farmer and grew up in poverty. And he came to this country illegally for a different outcome for me. He did not want me to be a poor Chinese farmer. And so one of the messages, Robin, that you may have heard me say before is I talked to my grandfather, because I never met him. But when I'm talking in environments like this, I say, thank you, Grandpa, for coming to this country, because I am a national news anchor. Thank you for making that sacrifice. Because if he had not been here, I would be a poor Chinese farmer. And so I'm very grateful for the dream that he wanted to have and live out, and I'm able to access that. And through his experience, my parents' experience, my father as a pastor and as a social worker, my mother as an elementary school teacher, they love their profession so much, Robin, that they were not high paying, that me and my family had to live through the welfare and food programs that were offered here in the United States when I was growing up. I remember going to sleep hungry many times, but they were not going to change their profession. They wanted to serve in the way that they knew was right for them. And so that opportunity, when I was sitting here writing the book, was to realize that I had gotten a lot of values from them without them shaking a finger at me. I just shook a finger at you, and I apologize because I didn't mean to. But they never shook a finger at me saying you needed to be that way. They just lived that way. And so the decision to, work part-time to take care of my father was pretty clear as I was reassessing why I made some decisions as I was writing the book. And so the book expresses the one strong value that came from that reassessment, which is the idea that I can think outside of myself in small ways, not in a Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa way, because I could never be that. But I could do it in bite-sized ways, in everyday ways. And so the book was an expression of that blue-collar approach to a white-collar idea, the idea that I could do something in small ways every day. And it really is sort of a note to myself, if you will, Robin, to remember to be that way. Because I often will think, when I'm making decisions or talking to someone, go, oh, I wrote that. I should try to do that, because I am so imperfect in many ways. So that's what inspired the book, and that's why I wrote it the way I did, as a self-help book.
Self-help book. I mean, yeah, it's incredible. And my question would be, but you sort of already answered it, Richard, is being selfless a conscious decision about everyday things, or does it require bigger changes of life? I know in the book also you talk about the notion of this compromise constantly happening in our brain, right? And I want to make the link to how we make decisions. And you say, well, if it's 51% okay, then it's good. Let's go for it. So tell us a bit more about what's happening in our brain, and this is a matter of everyday actions, and how can we, connect with this notion to how we make decisions in our personal life and in business.
So the 51% notion is that, it's that Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa idea that we think in some of the original research. I had a scientist and an assistant researcher on the book project. And by the way, if you're a poetry lover, at the end of the book, there are 4 poems. I am no poet, but I have always enjoyed poetry. So I brought in 2 poets to help me with it. In addition, a couple of comedians. I'm not sure if you got a chuckle or 2, Robin, but the idea was to say, the broccoli, as they say in the United States, the vegetables don't always have to be untasty. So I put a lot of cheese on top of the broccoli. And that the intention was that, in general, and Robin knows me well, I do like to smile when I can. And so that the idea of being selfless at a 51% level is that we often will get polarized in our decision making and our decisions to action, because it's not the 100%. And if we can quickly assess the opportunities that are not perfect, that we can do more. And why do we want to just do more? Well, number one, as I mentioned, we can't do it in absolute perfection. We just need to accept that. Number 2, by doing things that are 51% good or 51% selfless. So for instance, I'll just give a quick example. When you are walking past a person that is homeless, do I give $1? Do I give €1? Do I give a shekel or not? And I get polarized. What will they do with that shekel? Will be a good choice or not? So now I've realized in that assessment, well, who am I to be able to understand all of that? If I know that 51% of the time they'll have something to eat, I should give that $1. I should give that shekel. And that's one example of an imperfect movement to action. And by that, doing those actions, Robin, as you know in the book, I say you build muscle tone. Mm-hmm. And the muscle tone is important so that when the big opportunities are in front of us, we can leap. We cannot leap without muscle. And a good example of leaping are the healthcare workers in the last year. Why is it that I was interviewing so many healthcare workers that have a camera held up in front of them, talking to me in their cars and saying, I'm scared. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this virus is. I don't have enough protective PPE equipment for myself as I go to work every day. And they cry because they can't bring the solace and comfort to those that are dying in front of them. So many questions for these professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put down the phone, and what do? They go right back into the hospital. And it's because they built the muscle tone over the years of walking to a place that put themselves in some risk of disease, of being unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And because they did that every day, in their brain, they knew they were there to serve us and to give of themselves. That was a selfless muscle that we all saw was exhibited across the world of these healthcare workers. And so I posit in the book that we should do the same. How is it that we can go to work every day? How is it that we can create businesses and organizations that are selfless so that when the big moment happens, we can leap?
Yeah, it's impressive, and I like sort of how you make the analogy to building muscle for truly being able to be selfless every day. So it sort of takes me to maybe a last question on the subtitle. The subtitle of your book is like, it's the unexpected power of selflessness. Like, why unexpected?
Well, I'm surprised I'm sitting here with you. That's why. That's how unexpected it is.
That could happen in any given context that we were sitting together.
That's right. I think most people are saying that. I'm joking, of course. Why am I sitting here with Robin? Of course, I'm joking. But the idea here is that you don't know. So some of the unexpected opportunities is not only what I just described. Is, what is the opportunity as you gather the World Trade Centers of the world here today and for the last 4 days. It's unexpected that there is power behind selflessness because we think, number one, it is an absolute, which we just finished discussing. Number two, that personally and organizationally, that it is not a sacrifice. Selflessness is often seen as, I take $10, 10 euros, 10 shekels out of my wallet and I give it to you. That's minus 10. My argument is that it is additive. 1 + 1 = 3. And one example of that personally is that you live longer, actually, when you're selfless. You look better. You're happier. Oxytocin, dopamine levels go up when you're selfless. Cortisol, the stress chemical, goes down in your body. A study, for instance, showed that those 55 and above, and this just happens to be that group that they studied, who were selfless in their volunteer work lived 4 years longer. Those who were selfish in their volunteer work lived 2 years less than average. It showed that when you were the most selfless, you were perceived as being twice as attractive. How about that?
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end with our conversation. That and I believe it is in the book. Also, your picture was shared, right? Where there was a selfish Richard,
yes.
a neutral Richard, if I remember well, and a selfless Richard, and the selfless Richard, all the same picture, and out to be the most attractive person, although it was all the same picture. So that's
I'll take whatever I can get, Robin.
Very interesting data point here. So. Richard, thank you so much for this conversation. It's really moving and it's an inspiring story. I think, I'd love to work with you further and think more about the whole notion of the business side of selflessness and what the impact is there. So with that, thank you so much. I said stay tuned for how to get a free copy of Richard's latest book, Enough About Me. So I did say we were going to give away 250 copies of Richard's book. There will be an e-copy, so we can send it around to everyone in the world. So we will do so to the first 250 people who sign up for our new podcast. We are launching a podcast called Trade Wins. More on that in the next segment. So for the first 200 subscribers from the audience to the new podcast, and send us an email that you did to podcast@WTCA.org. Will receive a free copy of Richard's book. You can sign up for the podcast, subscribe through the website podcast.wtca.org, or also on iTunes, Amazon, and the likes. And so again, for a free copy of Richard's book, the first 250 who sign up for the Tradewinds podcast, subscribe, and send an email to podcast@WTCA.org. And Richard, I almost forget about the poll. I do want to just mention, question 1 was, do you practice a notion of selflessness in everyday life? 59% yes and 40% no. So it's interesting. Very interesting.
That's what I would say myself too. I would say 60% no for me, 40% yes of the time.
Yeah. And the second question, do you believe that being more selfless creates more personal happiness? It's an overwhelming 97% says yes. So I think a lot of us will feel much younger and live longer being selfless
and happier.
And that's the main notion here, and happier, absolutely.
Dopamine all the way, oxytocin all the way.
Beautiful. So Richard, with that, thank you very much for being here with us today. And
thank you, John.
Continue with the program. So we will now move on to our final session of today. It's the closing of the live stream part of the program. And after that, we will also air a survey. And we really appreciate your feedback through this survey. So again, click on the next button to go to the next session, and we will see you there momentarily.